Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alastair.
And this fortnight we will be covering the first volume of The Power Fantasy, the new comic series from podcast favourites Kieran Gillen and Caspar Wingard, and then Star Trek Section 31, the new series starring podcast favourite Michelle Yeoh. Which of these podcast favourites will deliver with their new project? Well, one of them certainly will. But first, Alastair, what else have you consumed, and does it feature any podcast favourites?
It features a reoccurring podcast segment, which previous listeners will be familiar with from the last episode. So I am continuing my watch through the Oscar nominees this year. As of recording, I've seen 6 of the 10 Best Picture nominees. So yeah, we're getting there. And today I'm here to talk about The Brutalist, which is, come out of left field a bit in terms of Oscar nominees. I think it wasn't as hotly tipped or as much on people's radar as a film like A Complete Unknown or Dune, higher profile Hollywood films. But I think it's really, really good. In fact, it's probably my favourite of the Oscar films I've seen so far. And I think the one most likely to pick up awards, but anything could happen on the night. It's a real epic movie. It was described by Little White Lies as capital C cinema. And it does really feel like an old school Hollywood epic from the 60s or something like that. It's really long. It's, I think, getting on to 4 hours, something like that, definitely once you factor in your trailers and adverts. The screening I went to had an intermission, which was very much needed to get up to, go to the toilet, stretch your legs. It kind of felt like watching 2 films back to back in the cinema, which I have done before. And yeah, it's kind of, the intermissions dropped at a good point to increase the tension. But yeah, it's just absolutely epic. It's got this beautiful photography. It really sort of shoots American, like, urban and rural landscapes with the kind of the eye of the old school epic filmmakers, like David Lean or John Ford or people like that. It's got this amazing score. It's slow paced, but it's really, really intense. It's got brilliant performances. It's got a great sort of, American story. This blew me away, really.
Okay, because, I'd spoken to you about it before you saw it, and you were very excited, so it sounds like it lived up to expectations.
Yeah, I guess it's my sort of film. It's about a modernist architect comes to America and embarks on building this incredibly ambitious brutalist building, and it's very much a sort of about this artistic ambition, trying to deliver this, like, what he thinks is a work of genius against the the disbelief and criticism of the little people. And it's got lots of really interesting stuff about the immigrant experience and the Holocaust, things like that. It's set during the sort of 1950s and 60s, so there's some great performances. I thought Felicity Jones as the main character's wife, I thought she was absolutely brilliant. Incredible performance. Adrian Brody's really good as the main character, the titular brutalist architect. He's excellent as a really good Hungarian accent. Guy Pearce is the American billionaire who's sort of bankrolling all this, also extremely good. It's got some great performances. It's got epic cinematography. It's really as I keep saying, like an old school epic. So if you're in the mood for something massive in every sense of the word, go see it.
So we're talking like a massive epic sweep, takes place over a long period of time.
It takes place over, the majority of the film takes place over about a sort of 10 to 15 year period. And then there's like a coda, which is like, in the 1980s. So there's kind of about 40 years from the first event to like the last event. And it's kind of divided into like 2 sort of like 5 to 10 year chunks. And then there's just coda on the end. And obviously the intermission comes after the first chunk. And the second chunk is after the intermission. And the first bit is kind of about the character arriving in America and meeting his patron. The second part is about his wife coming to America and what happens, and the sort of continuing evolution of this huge project. It's a great story, I think, about the Jewish experience, because obviously the characters are all Holocaust survivors who come to America after the Holocaust, and I think it captures the experience of assimilating into America, whether you adopt an American identity, maintain your original identity, or find some kind of balance. There's a lot about immigration and stuff, and the degree to which immigrants are welcome, tolerated, kept around if they have exceptional talents, but cast aside if they don't. It all happens quite slowly, not like really, really slowly, but like it's not a film that's in a huge rush. It feels different to say Avengers Endgame. That's also like 3.5 hours or something like that. But there's a lot that happens in that. They kind of revisit a huge number of previous films and have several plot, all intertwined around each other and like a big cast of characters. That's a film that crams a lot into 3.5 hours and moves quickly in order to hold your attention. This, it's quite slow paced, kind of a bit like Killers of Flower Moon in that respect, in that it's long, but it's not trying to move fast to hold your attention, but it does have this but it just build and build and builds kind of like slowly and then to a sort of fairly epic conclusion. Like I say, it's got the pace of a sort of a David Lean film, but it's got the score and the visuals and the performances to match as well.
Okay, so in terms of the themes of the Jewish experience and stuff, you also had that in, was it A Real Pain, last episode?
Yeah, we did as well, actually, I guess the two would form, an interesting, duology, especially as one's really long and one's like quite tight 90 minutes.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and they're both very much about the Holocaust and its impact, and about Jewish people in America, and about the Jewish experience, about, again, like from the range of characters you've got in A Real Pain, there's characters like the two cousins, they're very much assimilated, they're not practicing or believing so much, it's more of a cultural identity to them, but they see themselves more as American, when there's other people who see themselves as more like being Jewish is a bigger part of their identity. And I guess what A Real Pain is showing is the kind of the end state of a process, or the current state of a process that began with the opening of The Brutalist. Like the first scene in the first shot, The Brutalist opens with one long shot. It tells kind of the story of the moment that the Adrian Brody character arrives in America. Character very similar, I'm sure, to the grandmother in A Real Pain. Someone, maybe he's from a slightly wealthier background in Eastern Europe, he's Hungarian, not Polish, but someone from, that big Jewish community in Eastern Europe that was pretty much wiped out by the Holocaust. People came to America to fled the horrors, and then The Brutalist deals with the initial problems of assimilation, trying to get established, trying to maintain identity whilst entering this new culture that's uncertain and not, entirely receptive to all these immigrants coming in, and also the problems of trying to reunite families and things like that. And that's The Brutalist is the beginning of the process, this story of the Jewish American experience. And then I guess you watch The Brutalist and then you watch A Real Pain afterwards to see kind of where the Jewish experience has got to today.
Well, yeah, it's the American descendants of Jewish immigrants returning to Eastern Europe.
Yeah, exactly, to see where their family came from and kind of what they went through and things like that. Yeah, and it's interesting that they talk very little about the Holocaust in The Brutalist, and when people are asked about it, you can just, it's a great performance for Adrian Brody at one point in a sort of American Astor dinner party. Yeah, so, Holocaust, what was that like? In a sort of, and you can just see the sort of expression of pain that just explodes across his face as he tries to say very little but conveys so much. And then obviously you see, in A Real Pain, like the places where these communities were, and the death camps and where the horrors took place, going back to where this story of Exodus began. So it's kind of like very much the grandmother who's frequently mentioned in Real Pain but never seen is of this generation and the sort of cultural background of these characters. So this is kind of the experiences she went through. So they do go well together. They're I guess exploring similar topics but just I guess different ends of the story.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, you were talking about The Brutalist. I somewhat dragged us onto a film I'd seen, but
very interesting comparison. You raised some very good points, and they do go together, I think, very well.
But I'm glad it still works alone on its own. This has been more heavily Oscar recognised than A Real Pain, hasn't it? This could potentially go big.
Yeah, I think it's nominated. It's nominated in Best Picture, I think Best Actor for Adrian Brody, Best Supporting Actor for Guy Pearce, possibly Best Supporting Actress for Felicity Jones. I think I assume things like cinematography, directing. I haven't got the full list in front of me. But it's kind of got that kind of artiness and edginess to make it kind of stand out more, but it's more accessible than The Nickel Boys, which is pretty arty, although it does have this simple story at its core, as I think I said in the last episode. So it's arty, but too arty. It's kind of a great American story about the experience of coming to America and the rich background of different people that make America, which I think is the sort of thing that the Academy will respond well to. For the conservatives, it's this story about America, being a great country that assimilates people and allows them to, fulfill their ambitions. For the liberals, it's a story about immigration and tolerance and abuse of power and things like that. So it's got something for everyone. It's got great performances and directing. Relative to some of the others, the two foreign language ones rarely win, although Parasite is obviously the exception. It proves the rule. Did see A Complete Unknown. Thought that was very good. Timothée Chalamet doing, very, very good performance as Dylan and a lot of interesting people. Edward Norton as Pete Seeger was excellent. It'd be a shame if Kieran Culkin doesn't win the Best Supporting Actor for Real Pain, but Ed Norton did a very good performance. Maybe A Complete Unknown might walk away with it. Again, being another great American story. The three blockbusters are probably, again, just token nominations.
Wicked, June, and another
The
one.
Substance, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Counts as a sort of a blockbuster. Yeah, maybe we'll be surprised when The Substance wins absolutely everything. Who knows? But yeah, the Oscar evaluation continues. I could also recommend A Complete Unknown, especially if you like Dylan and like the 60s and the music and politics of the 60s. Might discuss that more in a future episode. But yeah, The Brutalist I can strongly recommend. And yeah, whilst I've been continuing the Oscar watching project, Nick, what have you been up to?
I've been at home watching TV, mostly TV from 2024. Today I will be talking about Colin From Accounts, the Aussie rom-com series which is on BBC iPlayer, which I have watched both series that exist of in the last few weeks. And yeah, this is about a guy called Gordon who is on his way to his job at a brewery. Well, to the brewery he owns one day, when he accidentally runs over a dog because he's distracted by an attractive passing woman flashing her nipple at him. So he and this woman...
What a comedy premise.
So he and this woman, Ash, who both feel partially to blame for hitting this dog, take the dog to the vet and end up sharing custody of it in a weird way when it ends up permanently disabled. And because it's a rom-com, they fall in love. So yes, that was the meet cute. That was episode 1, and it all sort of unfolds from there. In some ways, this is quite old school. It's quite sweet. It's quite pure. It really does just come back to the fact that these two are quite cute together, despite having some quite glaring personality flaws. In Gordon's case, getting very easily riled to getting very pointlessly, entertainingly angry, and Ash being quite snarky and smug and above it all in a very, I don't know, I guess possibly a very millennial way. Very very, I see you're doing that thing that normal people do, are you? It's like, yes, we're normal people. What's your point?
Yeah, sounds like a good premise with a lot of scope for both character drama and comedy.
Yeah, it hits a lot of the classic rom-com beats. They meet each other's families, they meet each other's friends. It goes often varying degrees of badly. There's quite a lot of cringe comedy in this, to be honest. There are quite a lot of occasions where they go to these sort of classic couple occasions, like, meeting each other's people, and one of them does something stupid and it's awful, or occasionally that person's relatives are awful. There's a character, Lee, who is Ash's stepfather, I guess, her mother's new husband, who is one of these great sort of magnificently terrible comic creations, in that he is just the most disgusting, creepy man possible. He spends his entire time euphemistically bringing everything round to sex and or talking in very thinly veiled terms about all the underage girls he's probably Snapchatting. It's very kind of bleak, obviously, but also quite funny.
Yeah, I can see how that would be rife for cringe comedy. It sounds like a modern Peep Show. Yeah, well, a contemporary Peep Show episode.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the difference in vibe between Colin From Accounts and Peep Show is that in Colin From Accounts, the lead characters are ultimately good, well-meaning folk who do seek and deserve happiness and probably will end up being basically okay, whereas in Peep Show, it's slightly more bleak and doomy than that, and the two lead characters will probably be trapped together forever in a cycle of misery.
Yeah, I guess Colin From Accounts has that kind of classic rom-com element to it, which is that, like, you've got these two likable, relatable characters. I mean, most rom-coms, you have to root for, the central couple to their relationship to succeed. That's kind of your kind of emotional core of the story, so I can see why that'd be how they do it in this.
Yeah, but if there's a difference between this and a lot of the classic rom-coms, I don't know, what's the archetypal rom-com at this point? The sort of Richard Curtis, Hugh Grant and shit, maybe?
Yeah, there's certainly British ones, yeah.
It's that they're allowed to be slightly worse people in some ways. They both have, as I say, their glaring personality flaws, which 2 seasons in have shown no signs of going away. The show still ultimately has a bit of a soft centre, and they do usually make up after upsetting each other and or their families, but they do still go into these situations and do quite stupid things.
Yeah. It sounds good. I've heard a lot of good buzz around this. Definitely, on social media and things like that. People really sort of tipping it as like a great comedy of the modern age.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's really nice. It's just a pleasant thing to watch. I think it's show run by the couple who play, the main couple, who are also a couple in real life. And yeah, feels like a nice sort of personal project. There's just very well-written character stuff. Yeah, I think it's been quite well-received and stuff. It was in somewhere in the top 10 for The Guardian Best TV Shows of 2024, so obviously I've watched it. And yeah, since I didn't have much on at the start of the year, I thought I would finally crack on with some of these shows from 2024. And yeah, had I watched this in 2024, I don't know if it would have busted at number 1 in the old TV top 10, but it very possibly might have made the top 5.
Oh, interesting, yeah. And it looks like it's got a lot of attention considering it's not got people mega famous in it or things like that. It's kind of more of a stealth hit.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's an Australian show, so it's set in Australia starring Australians. But I think the main two actors have starred in a few American things, but yeah, it's not got any massive stars in it.
Yeah, which is it's always good to see something unexpected succeeding. Yeah, and then so they've done 2 seasons, and I assume it's not sort of wrapped up at the end of the second season. It's still going to continue into a third.
No, the second season ends on a painfully awkward cliffhanger. Although, as far as I can tell, based on my internet research, i.e. reading the Wikipedia page, they haven't yet renewed it for season 3, which is a strange decision. I don't know if it's one of these Neighbours-esque moments where the show is much bigger outside Australia and no one's actually watching it in its home country.
Yeah, you'd hope that if it's getting international reception and ended up on like the Guardian's list, like and the Guardian being a big international publication, that would encourage them to make more of it. But some of these commissioning decisions just totally confuse me, so who knows?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it would be a shame if they never make any more, because I would like to know what happens after the ridiculous ending of season 2. But nonetheless, even if they never do, these 2 seasons are very good and very nice and did provide me with some comfort in the raging hellscape of, the world outside.
Well, that's all we can hope for.
Exactly.
It's a bit of comfort TV. Next up, this episode, we will be discussing The Power Fantasy, a new comic from Kieran Gillen and Caspar Wingard. In an alternative 1990s Earth, there are 6 people with superpowers, each capable of matching the destructive power of the US's nuclear arsenal. The world's survival depends on the delicate balance of peace between these 6 people, and that they never fight each other or the rest of humanity. We've read the first volume of this comic, that's the first 5 issues. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. You have to respect a comic about people with superpowers that, specifically as part of its premise, can't have them actually fight. Instead, there's a lot of subtle tension and mind games, and despite the showy idea of them never fighting, there are a lot of big moments and big ideas here, and a lot of quite intricate world building that's sort of unveiled very slowly. So yeah, no, I enjoyed this. It's interesting, it's clever, it's obviously, since it's focused very tightly on the relationships between these 6 individuals, it's got quite a lot of character study stuff, some flashbacks to how they first met each other, how they were born into the world. As a superhero reader, I obviously enjoy the sort of the subtle referencing, well, subtle to unsubtle in some cases, to, which characters have which powers and which superhero archetypes they're maybe vaguely based on, that sort of thing. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed this, and Wingard's art is absolutely gorgeous. I've read a fair bit of his other stuff. He did a series called Homesick Pilots with Dan Watters a couple of years ago, which was really, really good, really, really fun. But yeah, this might possibly be some of his best work. It's very good, especially on the sort of emotions and stuff. This is, despite the big superpower stuff, quite a talky comic. There's a lot of long conversations, and there's some really good emotional acting from Caspar Wingard, as well as nailing the big moments and his usual sort of amazing neon colour schemes. So yeah, no, really like this.
Yeah, I think we discussed Homesick Pilots on the podcast in the, what have you been up to recently section.
Possibly.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. Or we discussed it in the pub.
We definitely did All Against All, which was another recent-ish Caspar Wingard project.
Yeah, we did a full review of that, yeah. But no, I thought this was really, really good as well. As you said, I really like the premise of basically, superheroes who can't fight, which is, there's something interesting about that. Yeah, but it does lead to this kind of simmering tension underneath, every scene, because, that an argument can escalate into, absolute biblical levels of destruction. And it introduces across the 5 episodes the times that this has happened in the past. It's sort of revealed at one point that Europe has just been completely destroyed by some kind of previous fight, the entire continent. So that is terrifying, and it leads to this simmering tension throughout. Also, the way that the tension kind of rises throughout these first 5 issues as more of the world's revealed, more of the characters introduced, and more of the conflicts. So I thought it was just really good, tense kind of page turner story. You kind of always wanted to find out what happened in the next issue.
Yeah, and especially in terms of revealing both what's happening going forward and what's happened in the past. As you say, this idea that Europe just isn't there is not actually revealed till fairly far through the series. Spoilers, sorry. And it's all part of this sort of slow unveiling of the world and the world building in a way that makes it very much feel like, Kieran Gillen's really thought about this. There's clearly a lot of, backstory and a lot of wheels within wheels moving everything forward. In these first 5 issues, I will try to ease back on the spoilers, but he gets quite deep into the, backgrounds and characterization of a few of the characters, but a lot of the others, we're still got quite a sort of superficial knowledge of. So there's clearly still quite a lot to dig into in terms of this stuff he's very slowly rolling out.
I mean, similar to a lot of TV shows, they're kind of focusing on each character in each issue. Like the 5th issue kind of digs into the character of Magnus, and you get a bit more about his backstory and his character and motivation, where he's very much in the background. In the other issues, he's sort of mentioned and I think appears briefly, but yeah, it takes a while if you get an episode focused on him, or an issue focused on him. The 4th issue focuses on the Japanese character. So yeah, she's the focus of the 4th one. I think it's the 3rd one focuses on the sort of story of the angel character from Brazil, Valentina. So yeah, you're kind of getting backstories of each one. Of the 6, there's one that's not been explored very much. I can imagine she'll be the focus of possibly the next issue when that comes out. So they are kind of like building up, and also yeah, filling in the world and the backstory through these issues as well. I think it's very efficiently and cleverly done how they fill in the story. There's a complete absence of any maid and butler dialogue or heavy-handed exposition that's clearly just like given to the audience, which I really appreciated. That this is a story that treats you like a grown-up, doesn't feel the need to kind of like give you a kind of wink wink nudge nudge, here's the history bit. You kind of dropped into a lot of conversations where people talk in fairly kind of clipped ways because they obviously know the things they're referring to and don't feel a need to explain themselves, because these are people who know each other well. But through these conversations that you're observing, you are still getting efficiently filled in on what's going on and what happened. It is very, I think, subtly done how it explains the backstory of the world without using heavy-handed exposition, which I think is just exceptionally good writing on Kieran Gillen's part.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like slow unfolding of relationships. Even once he's established a sort of base of them, he can then drop these reveals. Like there's a very good reveal at the end of the sequence that sort of focuses more on the Masuki character, issue 4, which is a bit of a gut punch, to be honest, and I should probably not spoil that either. But yeah, there's some really good stuff here. Just yeah, even though you haven't known these characters for that long, still revealing these things about them that do hit you.
Exactly, yeah. You're kind of unfolding the kind of layers of the drama. Yeah, and also it doesn't feel the need to kind of like cannon through a lot of events very quickly. It's quite well paced, I thought, but is kind of building out this world and filling it in. And there is quite a lot to introduce you to, because like everything's new. I've been reading some of the essays that's in the back of each issue, and it's interesting, yeah, because he talks about his time writing X-Men, which we reviewed some of the run on this podcast, and saying that that's easier because you've got all the world building and character stuff is all like done for you, and it's much harder to create a new world because you have to introduce everything and work out all the the relationships and dynamics and mechanics and everything. And even though his X-Men run was one of the most complicated and intricate stories that certainly I've ever read and things like that, it's approaching kind of dark level of complexity with time travel stuff. It's actually, that's easy work to him compared to creating something from scratch. So yeah, it goes to show these. And also I feel what he doesn't say, I guess because he's modest, is that not only creating something from scratch but also introducing it to the reader in a subtle way that doesn't rely on heavy-handed exposition. That's also the hard work. I guess you can create a world and just have a kind of huge info dump at the beginning and then be like, there you go, now you know everything, get reading. But it's much harder to do it this way. But this is a more rewarding experience for the reader.
Yeah, and I read some of his X-Men stuff because he came on after Jonathan Hickman and sort of took over the Krakoa thing in the later stages of that storyline. And yeah, there was some similarities there. His X-Men book was mostly about the sort of machinations on the sort of small governing council of the mutant nation. So it was a lot of, again, the relationships between this specific group of like major mutant figures and them sort of moving against each other and backstabbing each other and forming alliances with each other and that sort of thing. So yeah, there is an obvious, definite connection between that and this. But yeah, the other upside of the upside of not working in a shared universe is, yes, you don't have the immediate recognition factor, but also he can do a lot more. Like, he couldn't wipe out a continent in X-Men because other people's characters live on that continent.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. He's got the scope to tell kind of the story that he wants to tell. And he can divine the parameters of this world. He can say, look, this is a world in which there are 6 super powerful individuals, and that's kind of the hard limit. It's interesting because I think after we've all had recently so much like all these big superhero stories in, especially in popular culture, you've got the MCU, you've got various overlapping DC universes, both in film and TV. You've got things like Invincible that, although it's just one TV show, I think as we said in our review, it's kind of got like a whole Marvel Cinematic Universe worth of different plot lines and characters and backgrounds and places it's set in, from Earth to like space and things like that. And we're kind of used to these like big epic superhero stories with like huge numbers of superheroes, and like this is quite different, I feel, as it's like kind of focused down to these like 6 individuals. I mean, it might expand throughout its run to adding more and more. It makes sense to begin with a tight-knit group of characters, but we're used to a world when there's like, God knows how many like Marvel characters. So yeah, onto like sort of like 25, 30 films, whereas like getting down to 6 feels kind of refreshing and different, much more contained than the stories we're used to.
Well, yeah, it creates a dynamic similar to what we see in some of these sort of dysfunctional family shows, like, I don't know, Succession, I guess, obvious recent example. Also Game of Thrones, also probably other things, where you've got this small group of people who all know each other on a quite familiar fundamental level, and then you just get into the sort of dynamics between them, and again, the backstabbing, the alliances, occasionally the front stabbing, and you could just work with that to form an interesting story.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that in this, and it does open with like a fairly epic scene with like an assassination attempt against one of the most powerful individuals, and then the repercussions of that. So which is it's pretty tense opening. So it really like grabs your attention.
And I guess there's also an obvious Watchmen comparison in there somewhere. Like that was obviously, especially the Dr. Manhattan character, the whole premise was that guy is basically a living nuclear arsenal and everyone's kind of scared of him. And the power fantasy, I guess, is taking that to another slightly more involved, slightly more complex space, and also playing with a few more superhero tropes. Like, rather than just having, this superhero is a metaphor for nukes and his basic thing is he's basically Nuke Man. These superheroes are all nuclear arsenals. We just take it as read that they could all fuck up the world, and they're all like different powers and different tropes, and they all have different relationships with the world and each other. And it's just, I guess, examining that idea even more.
Yeah, I mean, the analogy is very clear, which is one of the interesting things about this is, the nuclear weapons analogy and the delicate piece. It kind of opens with a discussion of these ideas, reflecting people like Bertrand Russell thought that America should just conquer the whole world because after the Second War, because the only way to stop a nuclear war would be for one country just to dominate the world, even though he was more of a pacifist. He just could see the destructive power of nuclear weapons. But there's a lot of analogies, such as the Valentina character arrives on Earth on the same day of the Trinity test, which we're all familiar from the film Oppenheimer. There's a group called the Nuclear Family, which is quite a clever bit of writing. The tensions between the superpower people reflect this kind of the uneasy balance of tension between, first America and Russia, or NATO and Russia, and then, now with China as well as a nuclear powered nation. It's reflecting this delicate balance of tension between them, and also the fact that these Cold War conflicts weren't entirely rational. It wasn't so much about the sort of game of chess between the superpowers, as then they would just sometimes the emotional states of the people involved, including some very old and decrepit Politburo members in Russia. Terrifying how close the world came to be destroyed by the whims of some senile 80-year-old men who were very paranoid and isolated. But it goes to show that the family dynamic in this shows that like these kind of Cold War conflicts were irrational and involved a lot of emotion, which is unfortunately closer to reality than many of us would like to be reminded of.
Well, yeah, and I guess this is why this is quite a timely comic, and that a lot of these concerns are unfortunately back and represented in our day-to-day lives, he says, sadly, thinking again about the outside hellscape. And you have a lot of flashbacks to like the previous nuclear standoffs, and then to the current day where things are clearly starting to destabilize again. And it's again, I'm not Kieran Gillen, and I don't know exactly to what extent he intends X to be a metaphor for Y, but it's hard not to feel that he's indicating that things can just tip out of balance. And again, it's faintly terrifying that even some of the superpowered characters seem more, I don't know, relatable, I guess, or human, or just nice than the others. But even they have to make some pretty terrifying life or death, shall we let X people die to achieve Y decisions, and it just gets slightly hard to even comprehend at times.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that could be interpreted as a metaphor. The calculus that the great powers engage, such as, people said, like, is using nuclear weapons against Japan to end World War II, was that more ethical than, a ground invasion, which would have cost maybe more lives, or occupation by the Soviets, which would have been much more brutal? Yeah, that's the game of chess that the great powers were involved in around, especially things like, Cuban Missile Crisis, which is directly referenced in the comic. There's the removal of nuclear weapons from Turkey, which the NATO nuclear weapons from Turkey, which is a thing that happened after the Cuban Missile Crisis, is also directly referenced in the comics. So it shouldn't surprise people. Like, we've read like Uber, which which is obviously Kieran Gillen knows his history. I think he's, enjoys his 20th century history, certainly. So yeah, he's weaving these things in and extending the metaphor of superpowers and nuclear weapons together. And it makes you feel that, like, this is kind of, maybe I think a more realistic approach to something like X-Men, that if you had people like, I don't know, like, Magneto or Apocalypse who could destroy whole cities if they want, it would be more like a geopolitical conflict than like a interpersonal conflict. Although these big geopolitical conflicts ultimately did come down to interpersonal conflicts.
Yeah, I did think for a bit when I was pondering my notes for this whether I would describe this as a more, quote, realistic take on superheroes, because although it does definitely feel like it's more interested in the geopolitical side of it, I don't think it's not like trudging gritty realism. That's the thing. Like, we can talk about this as if it's a fucking A-level politics textbook, but it's also really cool. Caspar Wingard especially is doing a lot to make sure that this is always fun and exciting, and there's some amazing panels and spreads on this. He does a lot of like fun variations in the artwork, like there's parts during the Masumi sequences where he leans more towards like a weird sort of manga Godzilla Cthulhu thing, and there's some amazing pictures of this horrifying beast rising from the sea. And then there's some of the Jackie Magus stuff in the last chapter where he does this sort of retro zine style. Like, yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff being pondered here, but it doesn't lose sight of the fact that this is also really cool and really fun. Yeah,
that's the classic thing I do love in comics, when they use an older style of art for a flashback to show that this happened in the past, which is just clever and simple and subtle. It does look amazing. I especially like the bits in Japan that also, as well as drawing on the sort of Japanese styles of graphic illustration, it also, I felt, because the main character is like a sort of avant-garde artist, the kind of color palette shifted much more towards something that was a bit more expressionistic and things like that. The world of the avant-garde artist kind of looks a bit avant-garde, or like it looks like something from the expressionist period or something like that. It's just little things like that. I mean, I guess it's artists really, I guess, enjoying their work and being expressive and clever, which just, again, it just makes a much more enjoyable experience for the reader.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the interesting beat that one of the atomics, the big scary superpowers, is also an artist herself, which leads to the fun position of the artist creating the art of the character, which is not necessarily meant to be the same as the work of the artist Caspar Wingard. There's some commentary on the art within the comic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she also has the temperament of a undergraduate art student. It's sort of like easily emotionally damaged by criticism, but also with some grandiose ideas about the work she's doing, and kind of wants detailed critique, but also is quite emotionally fragile, which is obviously terrifying when you realise, again, this character has the destructive power equivalent to the US nuclear arsenal. So that's always lurking in the background, I guess.
Yeah, and again, it's one of these things that sounds quite, fun or even silly when you say it out loud, and it's sort of sometimes played that way in the comic, but obviously it eventually comes back to the fact that this is actually quite terrifying.
Yeah. Well, as I said, there's always this simmering tension throughout it. Yeah, again, that's, I guess, the kind of realism you were talking about here. It sort of, talks about if someone was that powerful, realistically, how would they be handled by the world? When you're on sort of, like, again, Dr. Manhattan, like I say, godlike power, where there's nothing that the world can do to protect itself from such power. In the same way that there was nothing that really America could do to protect itself from the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union, other than just ensuring mutually assured destruction. So, and which I guess that's the world they live in, which was very, very tense. I mean, drove loads of people, like just ordinary people, insane. Just the thoughts of, at any second the bombs could drop. There's a great film called Charlie and Lola, which I think really captures what it's like when you realise that the world could be destroyed at any moment. It just drives you totally crazy.
Oh yeah, and if you think about the real implications of living in the world of the power fantasy, there are a lot of moments, or at least, a lot of moments implied, and a couple shown in the comic where, the superpowers can just eliminate, huge chunks of people with a wave of their hands. And again, that's a terrifying world to live in as well. And this comic mostly focuses on the perspective of the superpowers rather than going too far into the civilians, apart from a couple of like POV characters. But that's also faintly horrifying, and every so often you get sort of a taste of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was partly because of the sort of range of characters built up and the kind of subtle characterization and story. But I thought this was just really good. Absolutely excellent. Great read. On some level, it sort of reminded me a bit of Uber. I think it's partly because there are some lower level superheroes in this story. They're called the Atomics, things like that. So they have, less destructive power than the US arsenal, I guess equivalent to a single nuclear weapon. still pretty powerful. And I guess they're kind of the equivalent of the Panzermensch in Uber, lower level superheroes, when this is literally a pyramid of superheroes of their power hierarchy. And then the story focuses in on a few hugely powerful superheroes. I guess in this they're much more powerful than in Uber, but Uber focused very much on the battleships, the really powerful super soldiers, whereas in this it's focused on these few individuals who have, again, the destructive power of the US nuclear arsenal. So it just sort of reminded me of that in some way. I don't know if it's too ham-fisted a comparison.
I mean, they're both, I guess, works by the same author in a broadly similar area of, historical, geopolitical, superhero stuff, so I guess similarity happens. I mean, like I don't think you've read The Wicked and the Divine, another comic by Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey, which is also about a group of individuals who are basically a pantheon of gods, and the comic is about, the relationship between them. And that's a different series in a lot of ways. It's a lot more about the push and pull between the gods than it is the wider geopolitical implications. But it's still, arguably not an entirely dissimilar premise.
Yeah, and that one's also more about music, which is a big thing that Kieran Gillen touches on quite a lot, I believe.
It's less about music than Phonogram, but yeah, it's in there.
Yeah. And there's musical references in this. Yeah, there's a reference at one point to Dead Kennedys, Nazi punks, fuck off, and things like that. So yeah, there's always like keeping his hand in there with the musical references, which I do appreciate. But yeah, overall a really good read.
Yeah, no, this was great. I will be back for more.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Star Trek, Section 31, a new movie set in the Star Trek universe. Michelle Yeoh plays Philippa Georgia, former Terran Emperor who is now hiding in the Federation. She is recruited by a scrappy band of spies and adventurers to be in Section 31, Starfleet's Black Ops unit, as they need her help to recapture a hugely destructive weapon she has made. We saw this film on Paramount Plus recently. Nick, what did you make of it?
Well, what you can do here is you can imagine Star Trek plus Guardians of the Galaxy, but kind of half-assed, and you've more or less cracked it. Yeah, unfortunately this isn't going to be overly positive. This is one of those times where about the nicest thing I can say about this is it could have been worse. It's basically...
Ooh.
Yeah,
that is bad.
I can imagine ways in which it could have been worse. The plot does at least whip along fast enough for it not to be actively, aggressively boring. There are a couple of twists, one of which isn't too predictable. But other than that, yeah, unfortunately, it does suffer from largely boring two-dimensional characters, a very basic story in the, as I say, the sort of Guardians of the Galaxy vein, and some, at times, quite painful scripted banter that makes some of the clunkier dialogue moments in Star Trek Discovery look like high art. Often when watching this sort of misfire, I'd say that at least Michelle Yeoh was good, or it was bad only when Michelle Yeoh was off-screen, but honestly, even she struggles to elevate this. I'm not a massive Star Trek internet involved person, so I'm not completely au fait with the behind the scenes, but it kind of feels like a pilot which they've shoved out as a movie because they've decided not to make the TV show, either because Michelle Yeoh no longer wants to now she's got an Oscar, or they just agreed it wasn't working. It has big failed TV pilot vibes.
Yeah, it is really bad, is all I can say about this, yeah. There's a whole series of large issues with this, but I guess the two that really jumped out to me is that all the characters just kind of one-dimensional cliches. This is sort of the obvious ragtag bunch of rogues. Each character just constantly says basically what they're feeling and just kind of shouts it out so you know what exactly they're doing or feeling at every point. There's almost no personal conflict, no one grows or changes or anything like that. And almost every plot event seems really contrived. And for a big space adventure about getting this bomb back, most of it seems to take place on just one planet, them running around this kind of crashed spaceship on one planet for a significant proportion of the film.
Yeah, if you think about it, most of this film does take place on about 4 sets.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bar, there's a spaceship, there's this sort of crashed planet wreck. That's kind of it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's another spaceship towards the end.
Yeah, that is kind of it. Yeah, I guess, as you say, it's kind of got like TV show vibes. I mean, it's probably unfair to compare this as a film to, I don't know, something that's got like Marvel, Hollywood budgets. But then again, a lot more has been done with a lot less, including by Michelle Yeoh. I mean, she's good as doing like a kind of a big villain, just playing really, really evil. Yeah, and she's talented enough and she's captivating on screen to pull that off. It's just every other character is just such a dull cliche that it really makes you wonder what the point is.
Yeah, and honestly, I think even the Michelle Yeoh character doesn't have enough to her at this point to do that much for it. She's this whole me so evil, self-aware snark thing. I'm evil, but I'm also sort of seeking redemption. It was kind of getting a bit old when she left Discovery. It was just about working there because she was quite a background character who was mostly there as this sort of slightly twisted mentor to Burnham. But as the lead character, it's just that little bit too thin. It's just that little bit too panto. Yeah, they would have needed to develop her a lot more, and maybe they would have done in the proposed TV show, but that doesn't happen here, and as a result, there's just not much to it, and they don't even give her any decently shot fight scenes, which is a shame.
No, that is a shame, yeah. But there's no personal conflict in this. There's not really element of her growth. You don't see her, like, trying to overcome some things, such as, you know, like, overcoming her desire to be evil in order to do good or something like that, or faced with some kind of, like, moral dilemmas or personal crises. It's just an adventure where they try to, like, steal a MacGuffin that's just literally a circle that goes boom. But it also is not particularly, like, fun or exciting in that regards.
Yeah, I mean, I can fully imagine the meeting where someone said, you know, we've got a space franchise. People seem to like this sort of Guardians of the Galaxy gang of rogues on an action-adventure thing. Where's our version of Guardians of the Galaxy? But yeah, they haven't quite nailed it here. I think Guardians of the Galaxy largely works because of the way they do it, the characterization and the actual emotion, and they just haven't pulled that off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel that, like, but also Guardians of the Galaxy have these, you know, interesting characters. They're not as full dimensional as characters in some other things. I know, like the Brutalist, for example. But each character's got something, like, you know, nice and likeable about them, and they go on a journey, things like that. You know, the third one focusing on Rocket Raccoon. You know, again, that's an interesting thing, and there's more to the Rocket Raccoon character than just the snarky raccoon that likes guns and things that go boom. Whereas, like, these characters have very little to them, really.
Yeah, in a very strange way as well. Like, there's one character who... Is it Rachel Garrett? Who I think might be a pre-existing character, but I'm not Trek enough to really know.
Yeah.
Who does this whole bit in the final showdown where her main thing is loving chaos, and that didn't seem to have been set up that much in the preceding film at all. That just seemed to sort of honk out of nowhere.
I feel it was, like, aimed at some kind of Star Trek things, like Star Trek or Starfleet people like everything to be neat and orderly. But yeah, it was a classic moment of her just shouting what she was feeling, which is, I must learn to love chaos, I must learn to love chaos. And it's like, this is so unsubtle that it would get roasted in, like, an undergraduate creative writing seminar. Can't believe someone got paid to put this on TV.
Yeah. Occasionally there's a little sci-fi concept that's kind of fun, or there's an enjoyable enough action sequence. They have at least spent enough on the special effects, but it doesn't look terrible, I suppose. Again, it could be worse, but yeah, it's still not enough to save the general half-arsedness of a lot of the writing. Yeah,
exactly. It really didn't feel very Star Trek as well. Like, I don't know if they were going for a different vibe, like, say, like, trying to do Guardians of the Galaxy, or trying to do something that was less kind of noble and exploratory and things like that, whereas, like, and this was more like about, I don't know, the nitty-gritty of, like, you know, intergalactic conflicts where there needs to be someone who, you know, who breaks the rules and plays fast and loose or whatever. But, like, the whole thing just felt very un-Star Trek, and, like, they even had, like, I mean, I don't know if this is really counts as a spoiler, but, like, it's kind of revealed relatively early on. They have a character who's a Vulcan, but he's not really a Vulcan, it's someone else pretending to be a Vulcan, but he's just not Vulcan in the slightest at all. And there's not even a scene when he has to pretend to be a Vulcan for some plot-related things, which at least would be interesting and entertaining to watch. He's just a guy who looks like a Vulcan, which is really the only nod towards the wider Star Trek continuity, other than, yeah, I guess the Terran Empire. But that's relatively obscure. Like, you know, there's no Klingons, Vulcans, really, you know, any of the big stuff. Starfleet, yeah, very much in the background. I assume the various, like, aliens and fractions of characters are from are probably taken from Star Trek lore to appease the fans, but the real decision just to focus on stuff that basically really makes no sense to even someone like me who's seen quite a lot of Star Trek, and really just entirely swerve the whole vibe of Star Trek to try and do something totally different. You might as well have just, like, come up with your own sci-fi universe to have an adventure in, like, that was that Korean one from a few years ago that was good, like Space Truckers or something like that. Anyway, that was, yeah, because just come with our own universe and just have a cool adventure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you're trying to do sort of anti-Star Trek, then you need to at least sort of define yourself against it, which I guess they're sort of trying to do with the Rachel Garrett character's presence, but it just doesn't really get played up enough.
No, exactly, yeah, but I feel that, like, yeah, what I kind of want from my Star Trek media is a certain Star Trek vibe. It doesn't have to be, like, religiously adhered to, like it's sacrilege to deviate from it. For example, I felt that, yeah, Star Trek Discovery did manage to change the vibe up a bit, maybe be a bit more darker, a bit grittier than, you know, some of the Star Trek, things like that. Have more interpersonal conflict, which is classic Star Trek. The rules were there's, like, yeah, no interpersonal conflicts, everyone gets along. You can do that sort of thing, that's a modern take on Star Trek, but just chucking the whole thing out the window, again, bizarre creative decision.
Yeah, no, it's honestly, if anything, it always feels more like Star Wars. Not that being in the Star Wars universe would have made it particularly good, but yeah.
That's the more of the vibe. Yeah,
Yeah.
of like plucky adventurers, ragtag bag of people on a space adventure and in a rickety old spaceship is more of a Star Wars type thing than or Firefly, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I guess they've called it Section 31, which, based on what I know of the lore, means it's the sort of Black Ops section of Starfleet. And, I mean, I don't know if it's the sort of thing people are that interested in watching, but you could make an interesting show about, you know, the dark side of Starfleet, but it doesn't really feel like they're within Starfleet. If there is, a Section 31 hierarchy or bureaucracy, we don't really get much taste of it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. They're on the fringes of the fringe organisation, yeah. I mean, because I thought this would be something more about, again, like Star Trek's Black Ops, the necessity of doing Black Ops, you know, and fighting dirty to save lives, compared with the very whiter-than-white morality of Starfleet. There's some interesting tension there, but this is just some people who are like, oh, there's a bomb, it's going to destroy like 1 trillion lives. We should probably stop that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they ran into the problem that it's probably quite hard to do a serious, morally grey drama about Black Ops when your lead character is the cartoon evil emperor, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
I guess so.
I don't know whether they went into this intending to do a serious Black Ops drama and then got an angry phone call from the exec saying, nah, do Guardians of the Galaxy. And it all just went off the rails from there. But for whatever reason, this has not worked. And based on the fact that it clearly feels like a pilot, but they're not doing any more, I suspect they may know it has not worked.
No, exactly, yeah. I don't think it's been very well received. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, because like Starfleet is kind of supposed to represent the best version of America on some levels, like the best way America sees itself. And obviously the Section 31 ethos is exactly against that. But like, you know, it's better than our worlds when we're kind of aware that America does like bad stuff, sometimes like overtly, or at least Starfleet always looks good on the surface, but then there's this stuff underneath. But anyway, none of the thing they could have made. I promised myself I'd say something nice about this film, so here it goes. I did like the little like garbage spaceship thing that they truck around in, and that it's sort of like, rather than the nice flashy kind of high-tech Starfleet vessels that they have with all their fancy weapons and, you know, complicated systems, they are stuck flying around in like a former trash disposal ship trying to make the best of kind of its tractor beam and it's sort of falling to bits. And that was kind of like nice and interesting and created some tension. So there you go. I like the garbage truck ship.
Yeah, I mean, I've already praised, or at least said it could be worse in terms of plotting and effects, I guess. You know, as I say, even though the film was not good, I was not sitting there bored out of my mind during the film. It did truck along in its garbage truck at a decent speed. Things kept happening. It was over soon enough.
Yeah, there was always a twist coming along, I suppose, a betrayal or something like that. Turns out someone was like betraying someone or whatever.
Yeah, admittedly, one of the main big twists involving someone who was thought to be dead not being dead was fairly predictable, I thought.
There was a big twist. I did see that coming. Partly because there's only like one other character in this thing who's not appeared before. But that's a bit cryptic, but because we're not trying to drop spoilers, but never mind. But yeah, but then that character is the villains. Like, the villains are just evil. There's no subtlety to this. They're just evil. They just want to kill people for seemingly no reason. Possibly something about stealing resources, I think, from the wreckage. I can't remember. But they're all just like, basically like, let's destroy everything.
Yeah, and again, it's very, I don't know, there's a weird vibe of moral ambiguity and broad comedy which just doesn't quite work. Like, there's like the final scene of this when Michelle Yeoh is doing her I might just be evil and betray you all bit, and another version of the Vulcan guy is doing weird ex-wife jokes, was properly cringe. That was actually some terrible dialogue. I really assumed that the writers had just lost the will to live by that point.
It's like, just end it. Just end it. So yeah. Yeah, that was a particularly bad ending. And then Jamie Lee Curtis shows up for no reason. And so, yeah, this,
yeah,
like,
I don't know if that's meant to be an Everything Everywhere All at Once shout out, maybe? I don't know. But
I don't really understand, but...
well, that was random.
She probably would have preferred not to be associated with this train wreck, but there we go. There we go. It's not very much good to say about this, to be honest.
Yeah. Watch The Brutalist and Colin From Accounts and read the Power Fantasy all instead of watching this, to be honest. There's really not much for you here. I very much doubt, even if you are Star Trek hardcore, that this is going to be particularly important in the future. It feels like it's being quietly memory holed.
Yeah, I mean, really just consume any other Star Trek content. It should be better than this. Even some of the bad films from the 80s when William Shatner's wearing a girdle and things like that, you know, it's like...
Anyway, we're reaching stop, he's already dead at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, and on that note, thank you for listening to Moderate Fantasy Violence. We hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, then why not go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and read some essays, listen to some old episodes, and just generally keep yourself excited until we come back. And why not also leave us a nice review to fill more of that time? 5 stars, please. Thank you.
And then if you want more from us, you can find us on various social media platforms. Go to Facebook and search for Moderate Fantasy Violence. Go to Twitter or Blue Sky, search for MFV Podcast. You can also find more from me on Twitter, Blue Sky and Instagram. Search for Alastair J.R. Ball on all of those. Find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com or find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com.
And I've been Nick Bryant. You can find me as nickbryant.com on Blue Sky and Instagram, although on Instagram you have to type the word dot, whereas on Blue Sky it's just a dot. Even when my internet names are the same, it's still mildly confusing. And yes, we'll be back in a couple of weeks when we will be covering the return of some of our favourite characters. It's anti-hero Dexter in his prequel series Original Sin, and our first MCU movie of the year, it's Captain America Brave New World. See you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.